The first time Jasper Ellison saw the orc woman chained to the auction post at the border market, he thought she might die before the bidding even started. Her green skin was covered in dust and bruises, her dark hair matted with dried blood, and her eyes were half closed with exhaustion. The iron collar around her neck had rubbed her skin raw, and the chains that bound her wrists were so tight they'd left deep marks in her flesh. She swayed where she stood, barely conscious, while the crowd of traders and merchants walked past without a second glance. Just another piece of merchandise at the weekly border auction, somewhere between the livestock and the farm equipment. Jasper had come to the market to sell his harvest surplus, not to buy anything except maybe some seed for next season and a new plow blade. He'd had a good year on his small farm in the foothills, better than expected, and the grain merchants had paid fair prices for his wheat and barley. The coins felt heavy in his leather purse, more money than he'd seen in 5 years of scratching out a living on land that most people said wasn't worth farming. He should have left after selling his grain, should have bought his supplies and headed home before dark. But something made him stop at the auction platform, made him push through the crowd of rough-looking men who were eyeing the orc woman with expressions that made his stomach turn. The auctioneer was a fat man with a wine-stained beard who spoke in a bored drone as he listed the woman's qualities. Strong back, good teeth, young enough to have years of work left. Can't speak a word of the common tongue so you won't have any back talk. Came from one of the northern clans, captured 3 months ago during a raid. Starting bid is 20 silver. Nobody bid. The crowd murmured and shifted, but no hands went up. Jasper understood why. Orcs were trouble. Even enslaved, they were dangerous. Stories spread through the farming communities about orcs who turned on their owners, killed entire families in the night. Most people wouldn't risk bringing one onto their property, no matter how cheap the price. 20 silver, the auctioneer repeated, sounding annoyed. She's worth twice that for the labor alone. Anyone. The orc woman's eyes opened slightly, and Jasper saw they were amber-colored, like honey held up to the sun. They met his for just a moment, and he saw something in them that made his chest tighten. Not defiance or rage, which he might have expected, just a deep, hollow exhaustion. The look of someone who'd given up hope so completely they'd forgotten what it felt like. 15 silver, the auctioneer said, dropping the price. Going once at 15 silver. Twice. Last chance before she goes to the work camps, and you all know what happens there. Jasper didn't think. He just raised his hand and heard himself say, 15 silver. The auctioneer's face brightened immediately. Sold to the farmer. Come collect your purchase and pay the clerk. The walk to the payment station felt unreal, like moving through a dream. Jasper counted out 15 silver coins from his purse, watched them disappear into the clerk's lockbox, and accepted a bill of sale written on rough paper. The clerk handed him a key for the chains and said, "She's your problem now. Can't return her once you leave the market grounds." When Jasper approached the auction platform, the orc woman was sitting on the ground, her chains pooled around her. Up close, she was larger than he'd expected. Even sitting, even half-starved, she had broad shoulders and thick arms that spoke of natural strength. Her tusks were small, barely protruding past her upper lip, and her face had angular features that might have been beautiful if not for the bruises and the hollow look in her eyes. He knelt down slowly, making sure she could see his hands as he fitted the key into the lock on her collar. The iron fell away with a clank and she flinched at the sound. Her wrists were next, and when the chains came off, she didn't move, just sat there rubbing her raw wrists with trembling fingers. "Can you stand?" Jasper asked quietly. She looked at him with those amber eyes but didn't respond. "Right." The auctioneer had said she couldn't speak the common tongue, Or maybe she could speak but chose not to. Either way, this was going to be complicated. He stood and offered his hand. She stared at it for a long moment before reaching up and letting him help her to her feet. She was tall, taller than him by several inches, and when she stood her full height, several people in the market turned to stare. Jasper ignored them and guided her toward the road that led out of the market grounds. His wagon was parked at the edge of the market, a sturdy farm cart pulled by 2 oxen. He'd sold most of what he'd brought, so there was space in the back. The orc woman climbed in without being asked, moving stiffly, and sat down among the empty sacks and remaining supplies. She didn't look at him, just stared at her hands. Jasper climbed onto the driver's bench and took up the reins. The oxen started forward with their usual plodding pace, and the market began to fall away behind them. He should have felt buyer's remorse by now. Should have been asking himself what the hell he'd just done, spending nearly all his profit on a slave he didn't need and couldn't communicate with. But all he felt was a strange sense of rightness, like he'd made the only choice he could have made. The journey back to his farm took 3 hours, following a dirt road that wound through hills covered in scrub brush and wildflowers. The sun was setting by the time his farmhouse came into view, a small stone building with a thatched roof and a barn beside it. It wasn't much, but it was his, and he'd worked hard to make it livable after buying the land with his savings from his time in the king's army. He stopped the wagon near the barn and set the brake. When he turned to look at the orc woman, she was asleep, curled on her side in the wagon bed. She looked younger asleep, less like a dangerous creature and more like someone who'd been through hell and survived. He decided to let her rest and went to unhitch the oxen and get them settled in the barn for the night. By the time he finished his evening chores, full darkness had fallen. The orc woman was still asleep in the wagon. Jasper stood there for a moment, unsure what to do, then carefully lifted her out. She was heavy with muscle, but he'd built up his own strength over years of farm work. She stirred as he carried her toward the house but didn't wake. He brought her inside and laid her on the small cot in the corner of the main room, the one he used when he was too tired to climb the ladder to the sleeping loft. She settled into it with a soft sound, still deep asleep. Jasper covered her with a wool blanket, then stood back and studied her in the light of his oil lamp. What had he gotten himself into? He ate a simple dinner of bread and cheese, sitting at his rough-hewn table and trying to think through what came next. He'd bought a slave, which meant legally she belonged to him now. The thought made him uncomfortable. He'd seen slavery in the army, had watched men buy and sell prisoners of war like cattle, and he'd never liked it. But that was the law in the borderlands. Orcs captured in raids could be sold, and their buyers could do whatever they wanted with them. But Jasper had no interest in owning another person. He'd bought her on impulse, driven by something he couldn't quite name. Pity, maybe, or anger at the way those men had been looking at her. Now he had to figure out what to do with her. Tomorrow, he decided. He'd figure it out tomorrow. He climbed up to the loft and lay down on his mattress of straw and old blankets. Through the gaps in the floorboards, he could see the orc woman sleeping below. She didn't move all night, and neither did he, lying awake and listening to her breathing in the darkness. Morning came with rooster calls and the pale light of dawn filtering through the shutters. Jasper climbed down from the loft and found the orc woman awake, sitting on the cot with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She watched him with wary eyes as he moved around the room, lighting the fire in the hearth and setting a pot of water to boil. "Hungry?" he asked, even though he knew she probably couldn't understand him. She didn't respond, just kept watching him with that same cautious expression. He made porridge with oats and honey, divided it into 2 bowls and set one on the table near her. She looked at the bowl for a long time before slowly reaching out and picking it up. She ate in small, careful bites, like someone who expected the food to be taken away at any moment. Jasper ate his own breakfast standing by the hearth, giving her space. When she finished, she set the bowl down and looked at him expectantly, as if waiting for orders. "I need to do the morning chores," he said, speaking slowly even though he knew it probably didn't matter. "You can stay here or you can come with me. Your choice." She stood up, letting the blanket fall away, and gestured at herself with a questioning look. He thought he understood. "You want to help?" She nodded, just slightly. "All right then. Come on." He led her outside into the cool morning air. His farm was small, just 20 acres of cultivated land and another 30 of pasture and woodland. He kept chickens, a pair of oxen, a milk cow, and a few pigs. Not much, but enough to keep himself fed and bring in some income from selling surplus. He showed her how to scatter feed for the chickens, and she caught on immediately, moving among the birds with surprising gentleness for someone so large. Then he took her to the barn and demonstrated milking the cow. She watched carefully, and when he offered her the stool, she sat down and tried it herself. Her large hands were awkward at first, but she had the rhythm down within minutes. They worked together through the morning, falling into an easy pattern despite the language barrier. She was a quick learner and strong, able to carry water buckets that would have taken him 2 trips. By midday, they'd finished all the regular chores and he'd started showing her around the property, pointing out the different fields and explaining what grew where. She didn't speak, didn't make any sound at all except for her breathing and the soft grunts of effort when she lifted something heavy. But she paid attention to everything he said, following him around like a shadow. At lunch, he made more porridge and some fried eggs. She ate more readily this time, less cautious. After they finished, he tried to figure out how to communicate something more complex. "I want to know your name," he said, pointing at her. "Name?" She looked confused. He pointed at himself. "Jasper, my name is Jasper." Then he pointed at her again. "Your name?" Understanding dawned in her amber eyes. She opened her mouth, and for the first time he heard her voice. It was deep and rough from disuse, and the sounds she made weren't like any language he knew. Harsh consonants and rolling vowels that seemed to come from deep in her chest. "I can't pronounce that," he admitted. "Can I call you something else?" She tilted her head, questioning. He thought for a moment. She needed a name, something that felt right. He looked at her green skin, her amber eyes that caught the light like honey. "How about Mara?" "It means of the earth in an old language my mother taught me." She considered this, then nodded slowly. "Mara," he repeated, and she nodded again, something that might have been a small smile touching her lips. It was a start. The days began to fall into a pattern. Jasper would wake at dawn, and Mara would already be awake, waiting by the cold hearth. They'd eat breakfast together in silence, then head out to work the farm. She proved to be an incredible worker, tireless and efficient. Tasks that would have taken Jasper all day to complete alone were finished by midday with her help. She learned quickly, picking up the rhythms of farm life with an ease that suggested she'd done similar work before. When he showed her how to repair a fence, she understood immediately and started helping without being asked. When he worked in the vegetable garden, she knelt beside him and weeded with careful precision. But she still didn't speak, not in any language. She made sounds sometimes, little grunts or huffs that seemed to convey meaning, and her expressions became easier to read as the days passed. But no words. Jasper found himself talking to her anyway, narrating what he was doing and thinking out loud about farm decisions. She listened to everything, those amber eyes focused and attentive, and sometimes she'd nod or make a sound that suggested she understood more than she could express. 3 weeks after he brought her home, He woke in the middle of the night to the sound of crying. Quiet, muffled sobs coming from the cot below. He lay in the loft for a long moment, unsure what to do, then climbed down the ladder as quietly as he could. Mara was curled on her side, her face pressed into the blanket, her shoulders shaking. She didn't seem to notice him until he sat down on the floor beside the cot. "Hey," he said softly. "What's wrong?" She looked at him with tears streaming down her face, and the grief in her eyes was so raw it made his chest ache. She tried to speak, made those harsh sounds from her native language, but whatever she was trying to say got lost in the crying. Jasper did the only thing he could think of. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe here, I promise." She gripped his hand so hard it hurt, and he let her, just sitting there on the cold floor while she cried. It lasted a long time, years of pain pouring out all at once. When she finally quieted, she didn't let go of his hand. "You want to tell me what happened?" he asked quietly. "Even if I can't understand, maybe it would help to say it." She was silent for a long moment, then began to speak in her own language. The words poured out in a torrent, harsh and guttural and full of emotion. He couldn't understand any of it, but he heard the pain in every syllable. She talked for what felt like hours, and he just sat there holding her hand and listening. When she finally stopped, she looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if releasing the words had released some of the weight she'd been carrying. She squeezed his hand once, gently this time, and he understood it as a thank you. He stayed there on the floor beside her cot until she fell asleep, and then he stayed a while longer, just to be sure she was resting peacefully. His back ached when he finally climbed back up to the loft, but it felt like something had shifted between them. Some barrier had come down. The next morning she seemed different. Not happy exactly, but less haunted. She met his eyes more often and stayed closer to him as they worked. When they stopped for lunch, she sat at the table with him instead of off to the side, and she even made a sound that might have been a laugh when one of the chickens chased a grasshopper in circles. As spring turned to summer, the farm flourished. With Mara's help, Jasper was able to cultivate more land than he ever had before. They planted a larger vegetable garden, repaired old sections of fence that he'd been putting off for years, and even built a new chicken coop to replace the rickety old one. Working alongside her, Jasper began to notice things he'd been too busy to see before. The way the sun caught in her dark hair and turned it bronze at the edges. The surprising grace in her movements when she thought no one was watching. The gentle way she handled the animals, murmuring to them in her own language. He also noticed the scars. They were everywhere on her body, old and new. Some looked like they came from weapons, thin lines from blades or punctures from arrows. Others were less defined, the kind that came from beatings or rough handling. He never asked about them, but each one he saw made him angrier at whatever she'd been through before he found her. She was healing, though, slowly. She'd gained weight. Her skin had lost that grayish undertone that spoke of starvation, and the raw wounds from the chains had faded to pink scars. She moved with more confidence, less like someone expecting a blow at any moment. One afternoon in early summer, they were working together to dig a new irrigation ditch from the stream to the far field. It was hot, brutal work, and they'd both stripped down to their lightest clothes. Jasper had his shirt off, and Mara had tied her tunic up to keep it out of the way. He paused to wipe sweat from his face and found her staring at him. Not at his face, but at his chest and arms, at the scars there. He had plenty of his own, souvenirs from his years in the king's army. "Old wounds," he said, touching a particularly nasty scar across his ribs. "From the war in the eastern provinces. I took a spear there and should have died, but the field surgeon was good at his job." She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away and touch the scar with her fingertips. Her skin was rough from work but warm. She looked at him with a question in her eyes. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore, not really. Sometimes in winter it aches, but mostly I forget it's there." She nodded and withdrew her hand, but something in her expression had softened. She looked at her own arms, at the scars there, and then back at him. A shared understanding passed between them. They'd both been through violence, both survived things that should have killed them. She went back to digging, but he caught her watching him several more times that afternoon, and he couldn't help watching her in return. The first time Jasper took Mara to the village, he knew it was a risk. But he needed supplies, and he was tired of leaving her alone at the farm when he made the weekly trip to town. She'd looked disappointed the last few times he'd left without her, standing at the window and watching him drive away. So he hitched up the wagon and gestured for her to climb up beside him on the driver's bench. She did, her eyes bright with curiosity. The village of Millbrook was small, just a handful of shops and houses clustered around a stone bridge over the creek. Everyone knew everyone, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. Jasper knew that bringing an orc woman to town would cause talk, but he didn't care. He was wrong to be so confident. They'd barely reached the general store when Thomas Everett, the blacksmith, stepped out into the road and blocked their way. He was a big man with arms like tree trunks and a permanent scowl. "That's an orc," Thomas said, as if Jasper might not have noticed. "Her name is Mara," Jasper replied evenly. "Don't care what you call it. You can't bring that thing into town. Not safe." Mara had gone very still beside him, her hands clenched in her lap. Jasper could feel the tension radiating off her. "She's not a thing. She's a person, and she has every right to be here." A crowd was gathering. Some looked curious, others hostile. Margaret Hayes, the shopkeeper's wife, clutched her shawl and whispered to her neighbor. Young Bobby Fletcher stared with wide eyes from behind his mother's skirts. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Thomas continued. "Orcs are savages. They killed my cousin in a raid last year, took his whole family." "Mara didn't do that," Jasper said, keeping his voice calm with effort. "She's been working on my farm for 2 months now. She's never done anything but help. Not yet, maybe, but it's in their nature. You bring that creature here, you're putting all of us at risk." Jasper felt anger rising in his chest, but before he could respond, Mara touched his arm. When he looked at her, she was shaking her head slightly. Her expression was resigned, not surprised. She'd expected this. "Let's go," he said quietly to her. Then, louder to Thomas and the crowd, "We'll take our business elsewhere." He turned the wagon around and drove out of town, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Mara sat beside him in silence, staring at her hands. When they were well clear of the village, he pulled the wagon to the side of the road and stopped. "I'm sorry," he said. "They had no right to treat you like that." She looked at him with those amber eyes, and for the first time she looked like she desperately wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. She made a frustrated sound and gestured helplessly. "I know," he said, even though he didn't, not really. "But that doesn't make it right. You deserve better than that." She reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his knee just briefly, and he understood. "Thank you." They went to a different village the next week, one farther away where nobody knew Jasper. It went better, mostly because he didn't give anyone a chance to object. He conducted his business quickly, with Mara staying close to his side, and they left before trouble could start. But he saw the stares, heard the whispers, and felt the weight of their judgment. Summer deepened, and the farm work intensified. They spent long days in the fields, harvesting wheat and barley, and longer evenings preserving food for winter. Mara worked alongside him through all of it, never complaining, never shirking. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, They sat on the porch of the farmhouse watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jasper had brought out 2 cups of cider, and they drank in companionable silence. Mara kept glancing at him, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Finally, she set down her cup and stood up. She walked to the edge of the porch, then turned back to him and began to gesture. She pointed at the farm, at the fields and barn and house. Then she pointed at herself and made a sweeping gesture that seemed to encompass everything around them. She touched her chest over her heart and looked at him with such intensity that he felt his breath catch. "You love it here," he said quietly. "The farm, this place." She nodded emphatically, relief flooding her features that he'd understood. Then she pointed at him and made the same gesture over her heart. His pulse quickened. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? She must have seen the question in his face because she came closer and knelt down in front of him, bringing her eyes level with his. She took his hand in both of hers and held it against her chest, right over her heart. He could feel it beating, strong and fast. "Mara," he breathed. She leaned forward slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, and pressed her forehead against his. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, hearts racing in tandem. When she pulled back, there were tears on her face, but she was smiling. Actually smiling, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features or proportions, and everything to do with the light that shone through. He reached up and wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs, and she leaned into his touch with a soft sound that might have been a sigh or might have been a word in her language. "I don't know how this works," he admitted. "You and me, but I want to figure it out." She nodded, understanding if not the words, then the meaning behind them. She stood and pulled him to his feet, then wrapped her arms around him in an embrace that was both gentle and fierce. He held her back, feeling like he'd finally found something he hadn't known he was looking for. They stood there on the porch until the stars came out, holding each other in the twilight, and Jasper felt a peace settle over him that he hadn't experienced since before the war. This was right. Whatever complications came with it, whatever challenges they'd face, this was exactly where he was supposed to be. As the season turned from summer toward autumn, their relationship deepened in ways that words couldn't quite capture. They developed their own language, a mixture of gestures, expressions, and sounds that let them communicate on a level that sometimes felt more intimate than speech. Mara started teaching him words in her language, pointing at objects and saying the Orcish word slowly until he could repeat it. He taught her some common tongue in return, though she seemed to have trouble forming certain sounds. But she tried, and occasionally he'd hear her muttering to herself as she worked, practicing. The first time she said his name, she was in the barn feeding the animals. He heard it through the open door, tentative and slightly mispronounced, but unmistakably Jasper. He dropped the tools he was carrying and went to find her. "Did you just say my name?" She looked startled, like she hadn't meant for him to hear. Then she nodded, shy. "Say it again." "Jas." "Per," she managed, struggling with the S sound. He laughed, pure joy bubbling up from his chest, and pulled her into a kiss. It was their first real kiss, not just a brush of lips, but something deeper and more urgent. She made a surprised sound against his mouth, then kissed him back with an intensity that made his knees weak. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. She touched her lips with her fingers, looking dazed. "Should have done that weeks ago," he said, grinning. She smiled back and pulled him in for another kiss, and the chores went unfinished for quite a while after that. But happiness never lasted uninterrupted in the borderlands. Jasper should have known that. It was late September when the soldiers came. 5 of them, wearing the king's colors and riding war horses. They stopped at the farm just after dawn when Jasper and Mara were finishing breakfast. The knock on the door made them both freeze. Jasper stood and opened it to find a captain with a sharp face and calculating eyes. "Jasper Ellison." The captain asked. "That's me." "Captain Richards, King's Army. We've had reports of an orc living on this property." Jasper's stomach dropped. "What about it? May we come in?" It wasn't really a question. Jasper stepped aside and the captain and two of his men entered. Their eyes immediately fixed on Mara, who had stood up from the table and moved to the corner of the room. Her posture was tense, ready for flight or fight. "That's quite a large orc," the captain observed. "Female, isn't it? Unusual to see them this far south." "She works the farm with me." "I bought her legally at the border market." "I'm sure you did." "Unfortunately, there's been an increase in orc raids along the northern border. Several villages have been attacked. The king has issued an order that all orcs within 50 miles of the border are to be detained and questioned." "Questioned about what? Mara's been here for months. She hasn't done anything wrong." "We have our orders, Mr. Ellison. The orc needs to come with us." "No," Jasper said flatly. The captain's expression hardened. "I wasn't asking. This is a matter of national security." "She's not going anywhere." The two soldiers with the captain moved their hands to their sword hilts. Jasper stood his ground, though he was acutely aware that he was unarmed and outnumbered. "Don't make this difficult," the captain warned. "We can take her by force if necessary, and you'll be arrested for interfering with the king's justice." Mara made a sound, a low rumble that might have been a growl. All eyes turned to her. She was watching the soldiers with obvious fear, but there was defiance there too. She moved closer to Jasper, not touching him but clearly standing with him. "Jasper," she said, her pronunciation better than before but still accented. "No fight." He looked at her in shock. Those were the first words in the common tongue he'd heard her speak beyond his name. "We can't let them take you," he said. She shook her head. "No want you hurt." Each word was carefully formed, difficult but understandable. The captain looked between them with an expression of distaste. "You've taught it to speak. How domestic." "Don't call her it," Jasper snapped. "She's coming with us, Mr. Ellison. Whether you cooperate or not is up to you." Mara touched Jasper's arm gently, then stepped away from him and toward the soldiers. Her shoulders were back, her head high, but he could see the tremor in her hands. "Wait," Jasper said desperately. "How long will you hold her? When can she come back?" "That depends on the questioning. Could be days, could be weeks. Could be never if we find she's been involved in the raids." "She hasn't been. She's been here with me the entire time. We'll determine that. Step aside, Mr. Ellison." One of the soldiers produced chains, the same kind Mara had worn when Jasper first saw her. The sight of them made bile rise in his throat. Mara saw them too and went pale, but she held out her wrists without protest. As the soldier locked the chains around her wrists, she kept her eyes on Jasper. There was so much in that look: trust, fear, love, a plea for him to not do anything stupid. "I'll come for you," he promised. "I'll find you and bring you home." The captain snorted. "I wouldn't count on that." They led her outside and lifted her onto one of the horses, chaining her to the saddle. She never looked away from Jasper, not until they rode away and disappeared down the road. Jasper stood in the doorway of his empty house, fists clenched, mind racing. He'd been a soldier once. He knew how the military worked, knew that orders were absolute and justice was whatever the officers decided it was. Mara could disappear into their system and never emerge. He couldn't let that happen. He spent the next day preparing. He sold everything he could spare, tools and livestock, and stored grain, raising money. He put on his old army uniform, the one he'd carefully preserved in a trunk, and checked that it still fit. It did, though it was tighter across the shoulders than it used to be. Then he rode to the regional garrison, a fortress 50 miles north where he knew they'd have taken Mara. It took him 2 days of hard riding, sleeping in the saddle and pushing his horse harder than he should have. But he made it. The fortress was a grim stone structure surrounded by walls and watchtowers. Jasper had been stationed here briefly during his service, and he still knew a few of the men. He used those connections ruthlessly, calling in favors and spending his money on bribes. It took 3 days of negotiation, argument, and outright begging, but finally, he got an audience with the garrison commander, a grizzled old veteran named Colonel Hammond who'd served with Jasper's father. "You're asking me to release a prisoner during wartime," Hammond said, leaning back in his chair. "Do you understand what you're asking? She's not a prisoner. She's an innocent person who's done nothing wrong. She's an orc. Her people are raiding our borders. She's not them. She's been living peacefully on my farm for months. She's learned to speak our language. She's as much a victim of this war as anyone." Hammond studied him with tired eyes. "You care about this creature." "I love her," Jasper said, the words coming out with a certainty that surprised him. "I love her and I want to marry her if she'll have me." The colonel's eyebrows rose. "Marry an orc, that's not legal." "It's not illegal either. The law doesn't address it because nobody's ever tried, for good reason." "Maybe, but I'm trying anyway. Please, Colonel, you knew my father. You know our family doesn't make requests lightly. I'm asking you to let her go." Hammond was silent for a long time, fingers drumming on his desk. Finally, he sighed. "I can't just release her. There are protocols. But I can arrange for her to be released into your custody pending further investigation. You'll be responsible for her. If she's involved in any raids or violence, it falls on you." "She won't be. I guarantee it." "Your guarantee and 5 coppers will buy me a beer," Hammond said dryly. "But I'll do it. For your father's memory, don't make me regret this." "Thank you," Jasper said, feeling weak with relief. "Thank you." They brought Mara up from the cells an hour later. She looked worse than when they'd taken her, her skin ashen, new bruises on her face. When she saw Jasper, her eyes went wide with disbelief. "It's okay," he told her. "You're coming home." She made a sound that might have been a sob and stumbled toward him. He caught her as she fell into his arms, holding her tight while she shook. The ride back to the farm took longer because he wouldn't push the pace with Mara in such rough shape. They stopped frequently to rest, and he made sure she ate and drank even when she seemed too exhausted to do so. She didn't talk much, and he didn't press her, just stayed close and tried to make her feel safe. When they finally reached the farm, she slid off the horse and stood looking at the house like she'd never expected to see it again. Then she turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "Jasper," she said, "thank you, thank you." Her pronunciation was better, clearer though still accented. She must have been practicing even in the cells. "Always," he said. "I'll always come for you." She kissed him then, desperate and grateful and full of everything words couldn't express. He kissed her back with equal intensity, pouring all his fear and relief and love into it. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "Love you." His heart felt like it might burst. "I love you too." They stood there in the yard, holding each other as the sun set, and Jasper knew with absolute certainty that he'd fight the whole world if he had to keep her safe. The weeks that followed were both wonderful and terrifying. Wonderful because Mara was home and safe, because they could finally express what they felt for each other without reservation. Terrifying because they both knew the soldiers could come back at any time. Mara's common tongue improved rapidly now that she was actively using it. She still struggled with some sounds and had a heavy accent, but she could hold basic conversations. The first time they had a real back-and-forth discussion about what to plant in the spring garden, Jasper felt like celebrating. I think beans, she said carefully. And carrots. Good for winter storing. That's a good idea. Maybe some squash too, she nodded enthusiastically. Yes, squash good. It was such a simple conversation, but it meant everything. They could finally share thoughts, make plans together, be true partners. She also started telling him about her past, though it came in fragments when she was ready. She'd been part of a northern clan, living in the mountains. They'd been peaceful, trading with human settlements and keeping to themselves. But another orc clan, one that still held to the old ways of raiding and warfare, had attacked them. They say we weak, she explained one night as they sat by the fire. Say we forget orc ways, become soft like humans. They kill many, take rest as slaves. That's how you ended up at the market. She nodded. They sell us to humans, say we deserve it for being traitors to orc blood. I'm sorry, that should never have happened, she shrugged, but he could see the pain in her eyes. Is past, cannot change, but you give me new life, new home. This is your home, he said firmly. For as long as you want it. Forever, she said, looking at him with those amber eyes. Want to stay forever. He pulled her close and kissed her temple. Then forever it is. But forever was threatened again in early winter, when word came that the orc raids had intensified. Entire villages were being destroyed, and the king was mobilizing a full military response. The garrison commander sent a message to Jasper. Keep the orc woman out of sight and under control, or she'd be taken back into custody. They stayed close to the farm after that, venturing out only when necessary. Mara seemed to shrink into herself, the old wariness returning. She jumped at sudden sounds and watched the road constantly, afraid of seeing soldiers. Jasper hated seeing her afraid. He'd given her freedom and safety, and now both were threatened again. There had to be a better solution. The idea came to him on a cold December night. They were sitting by the fire, Mara mending a shirt while he oiled his boots, when he suddenly set down the boots and turned to her. "Marry me," he said. She looked up confused. "What? Marry me? Become my wife? If we're married, it's harder for them to take you. Wives have legal protections, and I want to marry you anyway, have wanted to for months." She set down the mending with trembling hands. "You want marry me?" "More than anything. But I am orc. You are human. People will hate. Let them hate. I don't care what they think. I only care about you." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You sure?" He got down on one knee in front of her, taking her large, rough hands in his. "Mara, you're the strongest, kindest, most incredible person I've ever met. You've made my life better in every way. I want to spend the rest of my days with you, building a life together. Will you marry me?" She pulled him up and kissed him fiercely, and when she pulled back, she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes, yes." The wedding was small, held in the farmhouse with only 2 witnesses. A traveling priest who Jasper paid extra to keep his mouth shut, and old Tom Whitley from the neighboring farm who owed Jasper a favor. Tom looked uncomfortable the whole time, but he signed the certificate as a witness, making it legal. Myra wore a simple dress that Jasper had bought from a seamstress in a distant town, telling the woman it was for his cousin. It was too small across the shoulders, but Myra didn't care. She glowed with happiness as she spoke her vows in carefully practiced common tongue. "I, Myra, take you, Jasper, as husband, promise to love, to honor, to stand with you always." Jasper spoke his own vows with a voice that shook with emotion. When the priest pronounced them married, Jasper kissed his wife for the first time, and it felt like a promise of all the life they'd build together. After Tom and the priest left, they sat together on the porch despite the cold, Mara's head on Jasper's shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "So happy," she said. "Never think I have this. Family, home, love, you have it now, and I'm going to make sure you keep it." She lifted her head to look at him. "Jasper, want tell you something." "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. Think baby coming." He stared at her, then at his hand on her abdomen, then back at her face. "You're pregnant," she nodded, looking nervous. "Think so, not sure, but feel different. And monthly bleeding not come." Joy exploded through him, so intense it left him speechless. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, feeling her laugh against his chest. "We're going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "You happy?" she asked. "I know is complicated. Half-orc child people will." "I'm thrilled," he interrupted. "This is the best news you could have given me." She relaxed against him with a sigh of relief. "I happy too. Scared but happy." They sat there in the cold until stars filled the sky, talking about the future, about names and plans and all the things they'd teach their child. It felt like the beginning of something new and precious. The winter was hard, but they weathered it together. Mara's pregnancy progressed, and by spring, there was no hiding it. The few times they went to town, people stared at her swelling belly with expressions ranging from disgust to fascination. "Abomination," one woman hissed as they passed. Jasper turned on her with such fury that she stepped back. "That's my wife and child you're talking about. You will show respect or stay silent." The woman scurried away, but the damage was done. Mara was quiet the rest of the trip home. "Don't listen to them," Jasper said as they drove the wagon back to the farm. "They're ignorant and afraid of what they don't understand. What if they right?" Mara asked quietly, "What if child is wrong somehow?" "There's nothing wrong with our child. Nothing wrong with you. The only thing wrong is the people who can't see past their prejudice." She took his hand and squeezed it. "You good man, Jasper, best man. I'm just a man who loves his wife." Spring turned to summer and Mara grew larger. She moved more slowly now, but still insisted on helping with the farm work. Jasper tried to get her to rest, but she was stubborn. "I'm not fragile," she insisted. "Orc women work until baby come, is our way." "Orc women probably aren't married to men who worry about them constantly." She smiled and kissed his cheek. "You sweet, but I fine." The baby came on a hot August night. Jasper had ridden to fetch the midwife from town, an old woman named Sarah who was the only one willing to help deliver a half-orc baby. She took one look at Mara and got to work without judgment. The labor was long and difficult. Mara's screams echoed through the farmhouse and Jasper felt helpless, able to do nothing but hold her hand and wipe the sweat from her face. But when dawn broke, a baby's cry filled the room. "It's a girl," Sarah announced, wrapping the infant in a clean cloth. "And she's healthy." Jasper looked at his daughter and felt his heart expand to hold a love he'd never known existed. She was perfect. Green skin like her mother, but softer in shade. Small tusks, barely visible. Dark hair and eyes that were still the cloudy blue of all newborns. Sarah placed her in Mara's arms, and the exhausted orc woman looked down at her daughter with such pure love that Jasper had to look away for a moment or risk weeping. "She beautiful," Mara whispered. "Perfect." "What should we name her?" Jasper asked. Mara thought for a moment. "In my language we have word. Means hope from darkness. Can say it Nara in common tongue." "Nara," Jasper repeated. "It's perfect." The midwife stayed through the day, making sure both mother and baby were stable. As she prepared to leave, she pulled Jasper aside. "I'll keep this quiet," she said, "but you know word will spread. A half-orc child in these parts. People won't like it." "I don't care what people like. You should care for their sake if not yours." She nodded toward Mara and the baby. "There's those who'd see harm come to them. You need to be prepared for that." "I am," Jasper said grimly. After Sarah left, Jasper sat beside the bed where Mara lay with Nara sleeping on her chest, his wife and daughter, his family. "I will protect you both," he said quietly. Whatever comes, I'll keep you safe." Mara reached out and took his hand. "I know. We protect each other, is what family does." The first few months with Nara were exhausting but joyful. The baby was healthy and strong, with lungs that could wake them from a sound sleep. Mara handled motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, learning quickly and adapting to the challenges. Jasper had never thought of himself as a father, but he fell into the role naturally. He loved holding his daughter, watching her tiny face scrunch up when she yawned, feeling her grip his finger with surprising strength. Nara grew quickly, faster than a human baby would have. By 3 months, she was already trying to roll over. By 6 months, she was crawling and getting into everything. Her skin had settled into a soft green shade, lighter than Mara's, and her tusks were just beginning to show when she smiled. The neighbors kept their distance, but Jasper noticed people watching the farm sometimes, standing on the road and staring. It made him uneasy, but nothing came of it for a long time. Then one October evening, when Nara was just over a year old, 6 men came to the farm. Jasper saw them approaching and told Mara to take Nara and hide in the cellar. She didn't argue, just grabbed their daughter and disappeared below the house. The men were locals, people Jasper recognized from town. Thomas Everett the blacksmith was among them, and so was Richard Porter, who owned the mill. They stopped in the yard, and Thomas stepped forward as their spokesman. "We need to talk, Jasper." "So talk. This situation you've created, it's not acceptable. You've married an orc and bred with it. You've created an abomination. That abomination is my daughter. Watch your mouth. You can't raise that thing here. It's not natural. It's not right. Nara is a child, an innocent baby who's done nothing to anyone. It's a half-breed monster," Richard Porter spat. "We won't have it in our community." Jasper's hand moved to the axe handle leaning against the porch rail. "You're on my property. Leave, now, or what? You'll fight all of us, if I have to," Thomas sighed. "We don't want violence, Jasper. We just want you to see reason. Send the orc and the child away. You can find a human woman, start a proper family." "I have a proper family, the only family I want." "Then you're choosing them over your own kind," Richard said. "That makes you a traitor." "If standing with my wife and daughter makes me a traitor, then I'm proud to be one. Now get off my land before I make you leave." The men exchanged looks. For a moment, Jasper thought they might actually attack. He tightened his grip on the axe, ready, but Thomas held up a hand. "We're going. But this isn't over. You'll regret this choice." They left, but Jasper knew they'd be back. When he opened the cellar door and called down to Mara, she emerged with Nara in her arms, her face pale. "We heard," she said. "Jasper, maybe they right. Maybe we should leave. This is our home." "But Nara, if they hurt her." "They won't. I won't let them." But doubt had been planted. Over the next few weeks, small acts of vandalism began. Someone poisoned his well, forcing him to dig a new one. His fields were set on fire in the night, destroying half his winter wheat. Dead animals were left on his doorstep. Each incident made Mara more anxious. She stopped letting Nara out of her sight and jumped at every sound. Jasper reinforced the doors and windows, started keeping weapons close at hand, and barely slept. It came to a head on a cold November night. Jasper woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of breaking glass. He grabbed his sword from the days when he was a soldier and ran downstairs to find flames spreading across the main room. Someone had thrown burning torches through the windows. "Mara!" he shouted. She appeared from the back room with Nara wrapped in a blanket. "Fire! Out the back door. Go to the barn." They ran through the smoke, Jasper covering them. Outside, he could see figures in the darkness, at least a dozen men with torches and weapons. The mob had come. "There they are." Someone shouted. Jasper pushed Mara toward the barn. "Go, hide, keep Nara quiet. What about you? I'll hold them off. No, I not leave you. You have to, for Nara." "Go," she hesitated, then kissed him hard and ran for the barn. Jasper turned to face the mob, sword in hand. Thomas Everett stepped forward, torch in hand. "It's over, Jasper. Give us the orc and the half-breed and we'll let you live. You'll have to go through me." "So be it." The mob surged forward. Jasper met them with his blade and the night exploded into violence. He'd been a soldier once, trained to fight, and that training came back now. He cut down the first man who reached him, drove his blade through the second shoulder. But there were too many. A club caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Another blow struck his shoulder, numbing his sword arm. He stumbled and they swarmed him. Then a roar split the night, a sound that was more animal than human. Mara charged out of the barn, wielding a pitchfork like a spear. She was terrifying in her rage, green skin covered in sweat, tusks bared, eyes blazing. She drove the pitchfork into the nearest attacker, then ripped it free and swung it at the next. The mob scattered before her fury, men screaming and running. She was protecting her family, and nothing would stand in her way. Jasper struggled to his feet, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Together, they drove the mob back, Mara's ferocity and his skill combining into something unstoppable. Within minutes, the attackers were fleeing into the darkness, leaving 2 of their number dead or dying on the ground. Mara dropped the pitchfork and grabbed Jasper as he swayed. "You hurt. I'll live. Is Nara safe in barn? Safe." They stumbled to the barn together and found Nara crying in the hay where Mara had hidden her. Mara scooped her up, and the baby quieted immediately, sensing her mother's presence. The farmhouse was a lost cause, flames consuming it completely. They stood in the barn doorway and watched it burn, holding each other and their daughter. "We cannot stay," Mara said quietly. "They come back, kill us next time." Jasper knew she was right. They'd crossed a line tonight. The mob would come again, and next time they'd be prepared for resistance. "We'll leave at first light," he said. "Head north into the frontier, find somewhere we can live in peace. Leave farm. But is your home? My home is wherever you and Nara are. The rest is just land." She leaned against him, and he felt her shoulders shake with silent sobs. He held her and their daughter while his life's work burned to ash behind them. They left before dawn, taking what they could carry on the wagon. The oxen, the cow, some tools and supplies. Everything else was left behind. As they drove away from the farm, Jasper didn't look back. That life was over. They traveled north for weeks, avoiding towns and settlements, staying to the wilderness roads. It was hard going with a baby, but Nara proved to be a resilient traveler, rarely fussing even when conditions were rough. They crossed into the frontier territories, wild lands where the king's law barely reached. Here, there were fewer people and more space, places where someone could disappear if they wanted to. In December, they found a valley sheltered between 2 mountains. A stream ran through it and the land looked fertile. There were no other homesteads in sight, no signs of civilization at all. "Here," Jasper said. "We'll settle here." They built a rough cabin before the worst of winter hit, working together as they always had. It was smaller than the old farmhouse, but snug and warm. They had supplies to last the winter, and the cow provided milk for Nara. On their first night in the new cabin, they sat by the fire with Nara asleep between them. Mara looked at Jasper with eyes that held both sadness and hope. "You give up everything for us," she said. "I gained everything with you. The farm was just a place. This here with you and Nara, this is my life. You not regret? Never, not for a second." She took his hand and kissed his scarred knuckles. "I love you, Jasper, more than words can say." "I love you too, both of you." My girls. Nara stirred in her sleep, making a soft sound, and they both smiled. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. They were a family, and nothing could change that. Spring came to the valley, and with it, new beginnings. Jasper cleared land for planting while Myra tended to Nara and started a garden near the cabin. The work was hard, but they were used to hard work. Nara was walking now, toddling around on unsteady legs and getting into everything. She had her mother's strength and her father's curiosity, a combination that kept them constantly busy. She was also beginning to talk, mixing words from the common tongue with Orcish that Mara taught her. One warm afternoon in late spring, Jasper was repairing the fence around their growing garden when he heard voices. He turned to see a group of people approaching through the trees. His hand went to his knife, but he relaxed slightly when he saw they were orcs. There were 5 of them, all with the green skin and tusks that marked them as full-blooded orcs. The leader was a tall woman with gray streaking her dark hair, and she raised her hand in a gesture of peace. Mara had seen them too, and emerged from the cabin with Nara on her hip. When she saw the orcs, she made a sound of surprise and said something in her native language. The older orc woman responded in the same tongue, and a rapid conversation followed. Jasper couldn't understand the words, but he could read body language well enough to see that it was friendly, if intense. Finally, Mara turned to him with tears on her face. "Jasper, these are my people, from my old clan, the ones who survived." The older woman stepped forward and spoke in heavily accented common tongue. "I am Thura, elder of the Mountain Ash clan. We have searched long time for survivors. Did not think to find Mara here so far south with human husband and child." "How did you find us?" Jasper asked. "We track rumors. Stories of orc woman and human man fleeing south with half-blood baby. Not many such stories, so we follow. Are glad we did." Mara was crying openly now, talking rapidly in Orcish to the other members of the group. They embraced her, touched Nara's face with gentle fingers, and generally made it clear she was family. Thura turned back to Jasper. "You are Mara's husband." "I am. You treat her well." "I try to. I love her and our daughter more than anything." Thura studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I see truth in your eyes. This is good. Mara has suffered much, deserves happiness." "What happened to your clan?" Jasper asked. "Mara told me they were attacked." Thura's expression darkened. "Yes, by Bloodfang clan who follow old ways of war. They scattered us, but we survivors found each other. Now we build new settlement 3 days north of here. We invite Mara to join us if she wishes." Mara looked at Jasper with a question in her eyes. He understood immediately what she was asking. Could they trust this? Could they finally have a community? "It's your choice," he told her. "But I think we should at least visit, see what they've built." The visit became a permanent move. The orc settlement was a collection of sturdy wooden buildings in a mountain valley, home to about 30 orcs of various ages. They'd built it in the traditional style of their clan, with communal spaces and individual family dwellings. To Jasper's surprise, he was welcomed. The orcs were wary at first, but when they saw how Mara and Nara looked at him, how he worked alongside them without complaint, they began to accept him. Some even sought his advice on building techniques and farming methods he'd learned from his human upbringing. They built a house on the edge of the settlement, close enough to be part of the community, but with enough privacy for their family. Nara thrived there, playing with the other children and learning both Orcish and common tongue fluently. Years passed. Nara grew into a strong, intelligent child who was equally comfortable with both sides of her heritage. A second child came, a boy they named Garrett, who had his mother's green skin and his father's gray eyes. Then a third, another girl named Kira. Jasper became a respected member of the settlement, sought out for his knowledge, and his skill at mediating between the orcish way of thinking and the practical concerns of frontier living. He taught the younger orcs to read and write in common tongue, skills that proved valuable when trading with the few human settlements in the region. Mara became one of the settlement's leaders, her experience with both orcish and human cultures making her invaluable. She taught the children, tended to the sick, and helped guide the community through challenges. They built a good life there, better than either had dreamed possible when they first met at that border market so many years ago. On a summer evening when Nara was 15, Jasper and Mara sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset. Their children were playing in the yard, Garrett chasing Kira while Nara watched with the long-suffering patience of an older sister. "You ever regret it?" Mara asked suddenly. "Giving up the human world for this?" Jasper looked at his wife, at the gray beginning to show in her dark hair and the laugh lines around her eyes. They'd been married for over 15 years now, and he loved her more deeply than he had on their wedding day. "Not even once," he said. "This is the life I was meant to have. With you, with our children, with this community. I've never been happier." She smiled and leaned against him. "I was so afraid when you bought me at that market. Thought you would hurt me or work me to death or worse. Never imagined you would love me." "I didn't imagine it either. But falling in love with you was the easiest thing I've ever done," she laughed softly. "Not so easy, I think. I was very stubborn. Took long time to trust you. You had every reason to be cautious. I'm just glad you gave me a chance. Best choice I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as darkness fell and stars began to appear. Nara called the younger ones inside for dinner, already stepping into the role of the responsible oldest sibling. "They will have good lives," Mara said. "Better than we did. They grow up knowing both worlds, accepted by both. That's all we can ask for, to give our children a better future than we had." She took his hand and squeezed it. "We did good, Jasper. Built something real and lasting." "We did," he agreed. "And we're not done yet. Still have years ahead of us." "Good. Need more time with you. Never enough." He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Then I guess we'll just have to make every moment count." As they went inside to join their children for dinner, Jasper reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate moment at the border market when he'd raised his hand to bid on a dying orc woman, to this peaceful evening surrounded by family and community. It hadn't been easy. They'd faced prejudice, violence, loss, and uncertainty. But they'd faced it together, and they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives. The farmhouse he'd lost didn't matter. The acceptance of the human world he'd given up didn't matter. What mattered was sitting around the dinner table with Mara and their children, listening to them talk about their day, making plans for tomorrow. This was home. Not a place, but the people. His wife, his children, his community. This was the life he'd traded his harvest surplus for, though he hadn't known it at the time, and he'd make that trade again in a heartbeat. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Jasper and Mara lay in bed together. She curled against him the way she always did, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. "Jasper," she murmured sleepily. "Yes, thank you. For seeing me when no one else did, for loving me when everyone said you should not. Thank you for trusting me, for building this life with me. For giving me everything I never knew I needed." She tilted her head up and kissed him softly. "We give each other everything, is how love works, yes." "Yes," he agreed. "That's exactly how it works." She settled back against him with a contented sigh, and within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Jasper lay awake a while longer, listening to the sounds of his family sleeping around him. Mara's steady breathing, the soft snores of his children in the next room, the gentle creaking of their home settling for the night. He thought about the young man he'd been, the soldier who'd come back from war looking for peace and found only isolation on a struggling farm. That man would never have believed this future was possible, would never have imagined he could find love with an orc woman, could father half-orc children, could build a family that defied every social boundary he'd been taught. But here he was, living that impossible future, and it was better than anything he could have planned. He'd walked into that border market intending to buy seed and a plow blade. Instead, he'd found the person who would transform his entire existence. The woman who would become his wife, the mother of his children, the partner who would stand beside him through everything life threw at them. 15 silver coins. That's what he'd paid for Mara. The best investment he'd ever made and the worst way to think about it. Because she wasn't a purchase, wasn't property. She was a person, a partner, a love that transcended every boundary. The journey from that market to this moment had been long and hard, but every step had been worth it. Jasper closed his eyes and let sleep claim him, secure in the knowledge that when he woke, Mara would be beside him, that his children would fill the house with noise and energy, that the community they'd found would continue to thrive. He traded his harvest surplus for an orc woman who couldn't speak, and in return he'd gained everything that mattered. A home, a family, and a love that would last the rest of his days. It was, he thought as he drifted off to sleep, the best trade anyone had ever made.